I am very excited today to be here on Faith Chats, where our conversation is always about faith, family, freedom, and America. I'm your host, Andrew Brunet, and today we have a Bluegrass Hall of Famer, my great friend, Doyle Lawson. How are you doing?
Well, I'm getting by, Andrew. How about yourself?
Doing great. So, to start off the conversation, share with us a little bit where bluegrass music came into the picture for you.
Well, just about as far back as I can remember, growing up here in East Tennessee, we, like a lot of other families, listened to Grand Ole Opry on Saturday. If we could get a clear signal, sometimes it wouldn't be so good out of Nashville, over 300 miles away. But I, just a little kid, probably guesstimate about 5 years old, and I heard Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys on the Opry one night, and there was just something about his music that grabbed me. And I asked my mother who it was. She said, "Well, it's Bill Monroe, and he plays mandolin and he sings real high." And I said, "Well, I want to do that when I grow up." And I fell in love with uh, Bill's music. I liked the way that he played with authority, the way he sang with authority, and I learned to love it early on. And of course, your bluegrass groups back then, they all pretty much all of them had a quartet or a trio that sang gospel music in the programs, and I learned to love bluegrass when it was pretty well new to the media, you know.
So you mentioned discovering the mandolin as a young boy. What was the moment that made you realize it would become your signature instrument? And who were the early players that really inspired your style?
Well, first was Monroe, of course. He, like I said, he played with such authority, and his music, the mandolin was a driving force in the music. Of course, it didn't hurt that he incorporated Earl Scruggs in about 1945 with that powerful banjo picking either. But Monroe he played with authority, drive, and like Earl did the banjo, and the whole group, Chubby Wise, Lester Flatt, and Cedric Rainwater, they all played. Well, it was a new music, and they played exciting. But I started with Monroe. He was my first influence, and again, here in East Tennessee, there was a lot of acoustic music, some bluegrass, some country, and a lot of times they had a mandolin. But some of the early people that I recall was number one was a fellow named Red Rector, who was working out of Knoxville, Tennessee. Red played off and on for years and years with Carl Story, who primarily did gospel music. And Red was a very stylistic player, heavily influenced by Jethro Burns, who was one half the Homer and Jethro uh, team, a comedy team. But Jethro was an excellent, excellent musician, wonderful mandolin player, and and I'm proud to say that later on in life, I got to know both of those fellows, Red and Homer or Jethro, and we got to be friends. And little once in a while, we'd pick a little bit together. And but then we had Bobby Osborne, who was a very stylistic mandolin player. Uh, Frank Wakefield, Jesse McReynolds, a lot of the early players. I could go on and on and on. And of course, the kids these days, man, they've brought it front and center, and they play maybe a little different style, maybe probably a little more progressive, or they probably incorporate a little more innovation. But that's all right. It's today. It's not like it was 60, 70 years ago when I was a kid trying to learn how to play. And time changes all things, whether you realize it or not. And the kids today, when they look at music and want to play, they think about it a little differently than I did and my peers when we were young.
So in 1963, at just 19, you left home from Nashville to play the banjo with Jimmy Martin. Looking back over 60 years, what's one lesson from that high energy, demanding era with the king of bluegrass that still guides your approach to music today?
Well, I'd have to say the biggest thing would be the discipline. He knew what he wanted, and it was up to you to get what he wanted. And if you did that, he was a fairly easy fellow to work with. If you didn't do that, then most likely you wouldn't be there too long anyway. He was very definite about what he wanted in music. He wanted his harmonies good, wanted everybody to phrase alike, play the same rhythm, and play like a well oiled engine, rather than everybody out there trying to show off and say, "Hey, look at me! Look what I'm doing." He wanted the band to be like a real cohesive and together. And I got that, from Jimmy. I was 18 in February when I went to work for Jimmy. I was 63. I turned 19 in April, but we covered a lot of territory in those the times I was with him. I played banjo the first time. 6 years later, I went back and played my second stay with him. I played mandolin.
So your time with J.D. Crowe in the New South in the late 60s and 70s was pivotal, bridging traditional bluegrass with progressive sound. How did collaborating with innovators like Tony Rice influence your own evolution as a musician and a band leader?
Well, let's go back to the start. And actually, when I was working for JD, that was before he changed the band name from. When I went there, we were the JD Crowe and the Kentucky Mountain Boys. And like most groups of the day, we all, most of us had to work day jobs because there was not a lot of money to be made in music, but we always considered ourselves musicians first, and we held a day job so we could be musicians. But it was, and I'm a little ahead. I was a little ahead of Tony. I was there in December of '66, and I stayed, with the exception of about 6 months or so. I stayed about a little over 5 years, and when I left Crow the first time to go back to work for Jimmy, he got Larry Rice, who was Tony Rice's older brother, and who was living in California. And so Larry came back and was working with JD. And when the guitar player with JD was quitting, Crow called me and said, why don't you come back and play guitar? Because I'll back up again. When I went to work with JD, it was as a guitar player. I filled in for the guitar player who was off from work for a while. He was sick and couldn't work for a while. Well, I filled in for playing guitar. That turned into a fact that one night I was showing the mandolin player a little break that might help him, and the guy said, "Hey, wait a minute, hey, give me the guitar." He said, "You play mandolin, I'll play guitar." And JD was very understanding. He never demanded that Gordon do that. I mean, it was left up to us. But anyway, so when I go back in early 1970 with Crow, I go back as a guitar player because Larry was an excellent mandolin player and a great harmony singer, had an incredible range. So I stayed there until the end of August in 1971, and I had the opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. to work with the Country Gentlemen and go back to playing mandolin. And since that time, I have primarily played mandolin more than anything else. I filled in with a gentleman for a while. We needed a banjo player and didn't have one for a while, waiting on him to work out his notice. So I played banjo for a little while until we could have somebody come in. But anyway, but Tony came in after me. When I left to go to the gentleman, he came to JD. So Crow had Larry and Tony, the Rice brothers, and of course Bobby Sloan. But anyway, shortly after that, he changed the name from the Kentucky Mountain Boys to the New South, and I think it was very fitting. I think he was trying to get away from the back in those days. Andrew, he had a lot of mountain boys, playboys, river boys, or whatever, and I think JD was trying to get away from that and have a something different, just as I did when I left the Country Gentleman. I said I didn't want a review, I didn't want a gentleman, I didn't want a mountain, a river, so I came up with Quicksilver. But anyway, I'm getting back to your question. Not long after I had put my band together, I got a call from Tony Rice. And he said, I want to do a bluegrass recording. I want to do a real straight down the middle traditional bluegrass. I just talked to JD and he's on board. And he suggested I call you. And are you interested? I said, absolutely. And he said, I want people to understand that all of us, our roots are in traditional bluegrass. He said, now they kind of categorize JD as country grass because Crow had been experimenting with a steel once in a while, maybe a piano and drums or whatever. So he got slid over into a country grass, and he said, they consider you more or less progressive or contemporary, and he said they don't know what I am. So anyway, but he said, do you think Bobby Hicks would be interested? I said, hey, here's his number. So anyway, that's how the Bluegrass Album Band came together. We intended to do one recording and had no idea that we would wind up doing a total of 6. And but it was a pure pleasure getting to work with those guys. I mean, they all had their A game, and when you went to the studio or went on stage with those guys, you best have your A game with you as well, because if you didn't, you're going to get left in a trail of dust.
So, forming Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver in 1979 marked a new chapter for you. What sparked the decision to strike out on your own, and how did you assemble that original lineup to create such tight, dynamic harmonies?
Well, I'd gone to the Country Gentleman, and which at that when I went up there, the band was Bill Emerson, Charlie Waller, and Bill Yates. Jimmy Goodrow was leaving to go to partner up with Eddie Adcock. And of course, Adcock was a longtime prior member to the Country Gentleman. Anyway, and Bill Emerson and I worked closely together. We both enjoyed looking and finding and arranging material. That was our thing. We enjoyed it. We worked very good together. I loved working with Emerson because he had such an ear for a song that was not necessarily what people might consider bluegrass, but he and I came to the conclusion that it's not where the song came from; it's the interpretation of the song that determines what it is. So anyway, then Emerson left at the end of May in 1973, and spent 20 years as the leading the U.S. Navy country bluegrass band. And so the finding the material and arranging sort was more or less left up to me. And so I was there a total of 7.5 years, and about maybe 5.5 into that, I was starting to get a little restless. but when Emerson left, the partners that were still together was Bill Yates, Bill Yates, Charlie Waller, and myself. And I couldn't have worked with any two two better men. They were great to work with, and I often remark that if anybody couldn't work with Charlie Waller, they wouldn't be able to work with anybody because Charlie was very easygoing, and as was Bill. Bill was a dear, dear friend, close as a brother. So it was not a matter of any dissension in that part. It was that I began to have struggle to find stuff that I thought would still contribute. And bottom line is, I felt like I had given and done all I could do where I was. There was something that kept telling me that I needed to try it on my own. Uh, I was I've been in the profession at that time about see 16 and 18 years or so, and I uh, I was in my early 30s, and I said, if you don't do it now, you'll get too old to where you don't do it, and then when you get older, should God spare you and give you a long life, you'll look back and say, I wish I'd tried it. And so that kept aggravating me about to see if I could. About a year prior to me leaving, I had produced uh, some music for these guys out of North Carolina, and I was very impressed with the young people. Jimmy Haley was an incredible, still is incredible guitar player, rhythm player. I was impressed with Lou Reed, who at that time was going by his given name, Louis Purtle. And so when I decided I was going to go for it, the first thing I wanted was a strong, strong rhythm guitar player. And Jimmy was the one I thought of first. And I called him, told him what I was looking to do, and asked him about Lou Reed. And he said, well, I can ask him because they had been picking a little bit together. They kind of wasn't doing a whole lot. I said, well, by the way, if you know of any banjo pickers laying around not doing much, and he had mentioned Terry Balcom. He said Terry had been picking some with us, but we're not doing a whole lot. Well, that call turned into the fact that they drove up to where I was living, and we got together and did a little picking. And to be honest with you, I don't think any of us felt a real magic at that time, but at the same time, we agreed that we'd come back and go through some stuff again. The second time, we felt it come together, and what I wanted and what I liked was that they were so quick. Uh, I explained what I would like to have and what I wanted. I didn't have a blueprint. What I did say is I didn't want to be uh, put in a corner where that we couldn't do something because that's not what they do. I didn't want to be that. I said, if we want to do a contemporary song, let's do it. If we want to do it right down the middle traditional, let's do it. If we want to do a little like kind of Western swing thing, let's do it. But I said, above all, I want to have a quartet like the quartet that my dad sang with when I was a kid growing up. My dad sang in an a cappella quartet for many, many years. And I loved the gospel music as long as I can remember. And a lot of songs that I hear today are songs that I grew up hearing my dad and the quartet he sang with. And the beautiful part about the songs the writers were writing that back in those days, they're timeless. They have never, in my heart, in my mind, they've never diminished in what they have to say. And I think I don't know that the writers were as concerned about deriving a lot of income. Maybe they did other stuff. I'm only speculating here, but I think they were inspired by God to write those wonderful songs.
So, speaking of wonderful songs, some of your greatest songs have been The Sea of Life and Help Is on the Way. Tell us how you got to those songs.
Well, we when we put the band together, we did one secular recording for a new label at that time, Sugar Hill. Barry Poss had founded Sugar Hill. He had worked prior to that uh, with County Records, which was owned by Dave Freeman, who later bought Rebel Records. Dave Freeman at that time had a mail order record play in New York City. He loved bluegrass, old time music. And anyway, he had a little label he called County Records. I was approached to do an instrumental recording, and Barry Poss came to me and wanted to know if I would be interested. I said, yeah, but I would, but I want to write all or most of my songs. I don't really see any merit in trying to do another version of Sounded Good and the Gray Eagle because everybody's done them, and what could I do to make them any better? And so anyway, I did that, and then he put the label together. I left the Country Gentlemen, who were with Rebel Records. I looked at for another label because I didn't want to be in competition, a direct competition on the same label with the Country Gentlemen, out of respect for Bill and Charlie. I didn't want it to seem like, well, I'll show you. That was never about that. So I called Barry and sent him a tape of 2 or 3 songs that we were rehearsing at the time, and so he called me up and said, when can you get in the studio? We did the secular recording. In the meantime, we took that quartet to heart. I told him I really wanted to have that, and acapella was what I grew up with, and I wanted to. You didn't hear a lot of it. Ralph Stanley did some, but there was very few people that did any acapella in bluegrass. But I wanted to hear those songs that I heard Dad do. A lot of them I remembered. Most of that I recorded that he sang, I did from memory, and sometimes I'd have to leave maybe one of the verses out because I didn't remember it. But anyway, so we really worked on our quartet, and the people really responded. Quite honestly, responded to that more than they, probably in a bigger way than they did the secular. Uh, so I called Barry Potts. I said, I want to do a gospel recording. He said, well, I think it's a little early. Wait. Let's wait and do a couple, 3 maybe. Then we'll. And I said, no, I want to do it because you don't see what I'm seeing. You don't hear how the people are reacting, see how they're reacting. And he said, well, okay, go ahead. So we did Rock My Soul, the second recording. And I had found On the Sea of Life, and if my memory serves me correct, I think uh, George Shuffler had a family band, the Shuffler family. And of course, George had played for years and years with Ralph and Carter Stanley back in their heyday. But he was singing with his family. And I believe that was the first time I heard On the Sea of Life. And so I wanted to I loved it. I wanted to record it. I had no idea that it would take hold like it did, but as it happened, I opened up the album with On the Sea of Life. And I firmly believe, and I've said it for years upon years, that On the Sea of Life and that Rock My Soul album was the one that turned the corner and allowed me to continue on with Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver for 42 years.
Wow. Doyle, I tell you, I have enjoyed this conversation with you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and I encourage people to go to doylelawson.com to find out more.
Thank you, Andrew. I sure enjoyed talking with you.
All right. God bless you. Have a great day.
You too, brother. God bless.